Welcome to My View On, a series of podcasts where experts in the industry give their personal view on some of the big topics making waves in the media. All of the views are the experts' own, providing a fresh look at key issues facing the financial industry. The government's annual budget statement will soon be upon us. On March the 16th, Chancellor George Osborne will reveal his latest spending plans to the House of Commons in what is a key piece of political theatre on the Westminster circuit. Much of what matters, of course, will be contained in the small print of the reams of official documents that accompany the Chancellor's statement, and further changes to the pensions landscape are certainly on the cards. To discuss this, I'm joined by Paul Speight, who's Head of Strategic Accounts at James Hay. Paul, welcome. First off, what are we expecting?
Well, I think we're expecting some changes. We, without doubt, are being softened up. We've had various statements out from the Chancellor around their bad news on tax receipts. The income flow coming into the Treasury is down, and his expectations and predictions are behind where he would have hoped. We've talked often about the cost of tax relief to the UK Treasury. It's a large amount of money, some suggestions around some £46 billion, and there is a lot of noise that there's going to be some significant moves around tax relief. And of course, there was the consultation during the summer and autumn of last year around changes to the incentives to save into pension schemes. So I think we are certainly expecting some changes around tax relief. And, personally speaking, I think some of these and some of the suggestions, if they come to fruition, could be good news rather than bad news.
Well, they're going to largely hit higher earners, aren't they?
So we had, or we have from April, the changes to the annual allowance, which, whilst I could spend several hours explaining how the annual allowance works, for most people, it's something that doesn't necessarily affect them. But for high earners, they're having their tax relief curtailed from April anyway. Certainly, they're going to feel a difference. But one of the aspects that we are hoping is if we change tax relief and if we have a nuclear option, if we call it that, have a nuclear option where we do away with tax relief completely and change the incentive to save from what I call a cashback environment. So you pay into a pension scheme, it's grossed up by the basic rate, and then you come to do your self-assessment typically, and you will get, if you paid a contribution in and you're a higher or additional rate taxpayer, you get a cashback. You get the money back. It doesn't go in your pension scheme. You get a cheque back, or it's paid directly into your bank account by the revenue. Now, that's troublesome for a couple of reasons. Troublesome for the revenue because obviously they collected the income tax through PAYE during the course of the year, and then on the 31st of January every year they then get to know how much of it they get to keep. That's not great. The other aspect is, of course, that money's not going into people's pension schemes. So wouldn't it be better if you're being incentivised to save that extra money, that tax relief actually goes into your pension scheme? So we have this phrase sort of participation in pensions. The flat rate probably best works if you say you save £10,000 into a pension scheme and the government tops it up by £3,000 or £5,000, whatever number they decide to settle on, so that you have £15,000 in your pension scheme rather than 10 and then a £3,000 cashback.
So tell me then what you'd like to see. A few thoughts there on what we're expecting, but what's your wish list, what you'd like to see the Chancellor do that would fundamentally change the way that we think about pensions, think about savings?
Well, I think the consultation document, titled incentivizing people to save, incentive to save, that's the key. So I don't think in pensions people are necessarily feeling the excitement that they should save into their pension schemes, and that's what really must happen. So traditionally, the traditional model was always that your employer, as you worked, created a pension scheme for you, the defined benefit market that so many people have enjoyed in the past and still will, of course. And then you retired on hopefully 2/3 of your earnings as a pension. And you didn't necessarily think about it. Now, if that model has gone and you've got to save yourself, you've got to incentivize people to want to make those contributions in. And by doing that, you've probably got to make it nice and clear and transparent. And I think a lot of the industry has moved a long way to that. And I think there's acknowledgement that auto-enrollment has achieved a great deal in this area. But I think if you want people then to pay money in, they'd like to see some incentivization to do that. And I think by topping up the pension, making the pension bigger, every pound you put in, you get another 30% added to it.
So more money from the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously they don't want to, this isn't going to cost them more than tax relief. They will curtail the amount that you can pay in. So I think that will be one of their big objectives. But short term, if you can say to the vast majority of people, and don't forget, we are the high earners make a very small minority of the population, but of course they claim the majority of the tax relief, incentivizing everybody else as well as them. That'd be a really good outcome. Getting people to say, actually, I'm going to, rather than that £10,000 going over here, I'm going to put that in my pension because I can see the real value of doing it because the government is going to participate in my pension scheme.
Okay, so incentivizing people. What else would you like to see?
Right, so if you're going to curtail the amount that people can pay into pension schemes, the savers. So at the last census, the biggest population by age was 47. There were more 47-year-olds in the UK than any other age group back in 2011. So great. They've probably, one would hope they haven't got student loans. One would imagine that they have probably gone quite a long way into any mortgage repayments. So their debt, hopefully, is smaller than the general population, I would assume. So they're saving, and they'll be saving for their retirement. They'll be in their 50s now. They will want to pay money into a pensions savings vehicle. We have a relatively small ISA allowance, and ISAs, as the Treasury would acknowledge, actually don't cost them a great deal in lost tax revenue.
Just remind us what that allowance is at the moment.
Yeah, so you can pay just over $15,000 into your ISA. And obviously the benefit, the tax-free benefit that you have in there is savings income if it's cash. You haven't got any savings tax on it, and dividend tax. There's obviously a new dividend allowance coming in, but the amount that's lost through those funds not having an additional tax because you're holding it inside an ISA is relatively small. So if you're only going to allow a let's say £10,000 allowance that you can pay into your pension that then gets topped up, these people are still going to want to save somewhere. And for me, making that tax-free is a real incentive. So why not make the ISA allowance, say, £50,000?
Would that have a big impact? Can the government afford that?
Yeah, I'd say the lost tax from money being held in ISAs is relatively small, but I think the political statement would be a great one. You can now pay £50,000 into your ISA, and it will continue to keep that saving group, the group that want to save for their retirement, have to save for their retirement. They can't pay significant sums into their pension. Let's let them pay them into their ISA.
And anything else as well? We were looking at incentivizing. We're looking at upping the amount that people can put into their ISAs. Anything else you'd like to see?
Well, the one last aspect I think that we do as an industry need to address. So widely acknowledged that pensions freedoms was good. Certainly consumers all the feedback is they find this really positive, that the idea they no longer need to buy an annuity has been very, very warmly received. The problem is fixed income is still probably very popular. We saw that when the government released their pensioner bonds. Fabulously popular. Why not have something similar, a government-backed fixed income environment that you can buy through the pension, rather than the experience I suspect most people have had, which is they've taken the money out of the pension and then used it to go and buy some kind of fixed income, be it a bond from the government or NSI or whoever it happens to be. Of course, the two are the same, but the principle is where I'm getting at, that you buy it in a taxed environment. Why not let the pension fund itself buy an element? And you probably can't have a free-for-all because the government couldn't afford to do that, but some kind of fixed income amount, be it a £20,000 or £50,000 maximum per individual, that you can go and buy a 5-year fixed income government-backed, probably with an enhanced rate. Because, of course, the problem with the annuity market was that the companies that were issuing them this sort of poor value, of course it was poor value, it was reflecting the yield they can get on fixed income securities in the marketplace, and of course what was happening with life expectancy. So it wasn't that annuities were poor value, it was just reflecting the economic environment we're in right now. The government tried to address that with these pensioner bonds, and I think that would be a fantastic thing to now allow people to have in their pensions as well.
So some sensible ideas there that I'm sure many people would find interesting. But one of the criticisms there has been of government policy in the pensions arena is that there has been too much change. You mentioned pensions freedom, you mentioned automatic enrolment, and other elements as well that have radically altered the pensions landscape. that's a good thing in many ways, but it confuses people as well. Is there too much change? And, would you like to see that curtailed a little?
It's almost a standing joke in the industry that pension simplification of 2006 started a journey of more complicated pension rules than have ever been seen before. I think the one aspect, and because it's been all about curtailing the cost of tax relief, that is probably the most complicated is the issue around annual allowance. And the annual allowance is simply a mechanism by which the government is controlling tax relief by limiting how much can be paid in or on behalf of an individual into their pension scheme. If I could ask one thing of the Chancellor, I think in terms of simplifying some of the rules, I think the most unfair aspect of that is that an individual is penalised for how much their company has paid in on their behalf, either actually or notionally. And those in defined benefit schemes in particular have felt this pain, whereby your limit of £40,000 a year could be completely absorbed by you getting a pay rise at work or a promotion. And that increase in salary, if you're in a final salary scheme, if it's pension linked, means that you quickly bust through your £40,000 limit. And the way that that tax is charged is it's put onto your income tax. So you then pay income tax on it as though you'd received it as salary, even though it, of course, never was.
So there's a nasty bill waiting there for you.
Nasty bill, and we've seen some examples and some very, very nasty bills. Now, of course, you can ask your scheme to pay this charge on your behalf, but if you've been paying money into your own personal pension, you suddenly find you haven't got tax relief on that either. Now, so all I would ask is if we're going to move around and go to this participation, let's have a personal allowance that says whatever you are and whatever you're doing, a universal allowance that says I can pay in £10,000, £20,000, whatever number we settle on, into a pension scheme, and I can personally get the incentive from the government for me doing that. What my company does on the other side, on my behalf, yes, you're going to have rules that stop poor behaviour by some corporates, or however you want to phrase it, that control the cost of tax relief in the corporate world for corporate pension planning. But let's do that. That's not beyond the wit of man. We can certainly have rules around corporate governance in terms of running the pension schemes. But I think individuals there should be an allowance that says you can pay this in, and that's a certain finite amount.
Okay. Paul, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much indeed. That's Paul Speight, Head of Strategic Accounts at James Hay.